Welcome to Lab 10, Part 1. This is the beginning of our work with actually implementing a database in our MySQL system. So to get started, I've already got my XAMPP control panel open. If you'll notice, I've got a system set up with the default settings running port 80 and 3306 for MySQL. So let's go ahead and get started with our work with our MySQL database. So I'm going to click on the admin button and open up our PHP MyAdmin. And we've got this all set to go. Notice that we still have a couple of things here from the install, namely the test database is still there. So we'll eventually have to get rid of that. But for now, let's just focus on creating a database and updating our users. So as you just saw, we've got our admin open, and PHP MyAdmin is a very commonly used tool. It's a great thing to have in your toolkit. Looking at, by default, we're going to open up this menu button and start off by looking at our databases. And again, we have several databases here. The first thing I want to do is get rid of the test database. The test database is really a weak link in all of this, so let's get rid of it. The standard way to do that in database speak is to drop that database. So I'm going to click on the drop button, and it says I'm about ready to destroy the database. So that's fine. That's what I want to do. So boom, drop it. Notice it immediately falls off. Okay, so now we're going to start following our lab document for this particular lab. First thing we need to do is to create a database. So I've got my databases here. So we're going to use the built-in functionality here of creating a database. So we're going to create a database called My Database. Not very imaginative, but it is only for learning. We're going to leave the default settings for the type of content and just click Create. So now we have our My Database. The next thing we want to do is to create a new user for the My Database database. And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't. There we go. That's what I've been missing. I shrunk this PHP MyAdmin interface down to fit inside my video recording window, and that was causing me a bit of a problem because I wasn't seeing the things that I normally get to see on this toolbar here. We're still missing the important one for creating a new user, our database that we're working with, My Database. And then we're going to select privileges. We're going to select privileges. Notice that by default, we only have 3 root users for various things. So we're going to need to raise this up so that we can add a new user account. User account link. We're going to create the user CTI110 local host database. Always need passwords for users, so we're going to set the permissions to everything. Check all. Often you won't do that, particularly on the administrative stuff. but it depends on each application. For this, to keep things simple and educational, we're just going to make select all. So we've added one new user, our new CTI 110 person. Okay, so let's move on to the next part of this, which is to create a table in our database so that we can actually put data in. And if you notice, the structure for our database has no tables in it. So first thing we're going to need to do is to create a new table. And for this particular exercise, we're going to create a new table to keep a list of people in. So we're going to create a new table with 5 columns called personnel. And once we click on this create button, we're given a bunch of empty boxes to put all of our various types of data that's going to go in each column. And for the purposes of our data that we're going to be working with, we're going to use something called an employee ID, which is going to be an int. So just type in that item, int. Don't need to worry about the length. No defaults. The next thing we're going to have is our first name and then last name in the next one. And for the purposes of this database, we're going to use something called a varchar. That stands for variable character length. Limit that to 64. But it can be anything within that 0 to 6 or 1 to 64. Last name, same thing. That 64 is generally pretty lengthy and long enough, but sometimes you just never know. You have to understand the data that you're going to be using. Then we need to use job title. Notice there's a typo in the document for that. So job title is also a varchar. And it is also 64. And then the last item that's going to go in there is the hourly wage. And that's going to be a float. And now we need to do a couple of little things. Before we actually close this out, we need to make sure that we have a proper key structure going on here. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the employee ID as your primary key. And it's going to give us this new table to work with. And for our purposes here, we don't need to use any advanced options. This is pretty simple and straightforward. Just going to click go. And then once we get that all the way done. We just need to click the save. And there we go. It automatically goes back up to our structure here. We also want to go in and make the employee ID a unique key as well, because obviously you don't want to have two employees with the same key. The one last thing we need to do with this part of creating this table is to scroll down, because we need to make the employee ID unique. And to do that, we're just going to this index section. And it's already got this set to 1. All we have to do in this particular simple case is to simply click on go. And we're just going to say go, and it's going to give us that information. And that's all we should need to do. Of course, now we don't have any data in there, but we do have now an actual table within our My Database database, and we have columns. So there's our columns. Notice that it has a lot of nice icons to display what kinds of information we're dealing with there, and it also has a list of indexes. Now we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to create a timesheet table. So again, we're going to go through My Database. We're going to create a new table, and this again is timesheet to keep track of hours worked. And we're going to make this with and again, this is going to be only three columns to match our data that we're going to put in those. Because remember, we were given information at the beginning of our document that we're only going to need employee ID and hours worked. Okay, and the employee ID is going to link to personnel employee ID. So we only need 2 columns, so we're going to click create. So we need employee ID, integer, and then we're going to need hours worked, and that's going to be float. Okay, And that's all we should need. Okay, so that's in there. Now we got to take care of this business about linking the employee IDs over. We do need to mark the employee ID as a primary key, which I'd left out. And I forgot that just by selecting the employee ID, I can make it a primary key with this right here. So I did that. And now you see the primary key indicator on that field. What we need to do now is go back down to the indexes, and we need to make employee a primary unique key. So we're going to ID is unique, and we simply hit go. And then our timesheet structure should again have our columns, employee ID, and hours worked, with indexes set to employee ID as a primary. The next thing we need to do is to add the data. And I will be showing you that in part 2 of this Lab 10.